If a country is to be corruption-free and become a nation of beautiful minds, I strongly feel there are three key societal members who can make a difference. They are the father, the mother, and the teacher. APJ Abdul Kalam, former president of India. And to some extent, folks, after what we have seen and continue to see over the past couple of weeks, perhaps the truth in those words and what they should mean for us in TNT, if they are not quite evident, a strong case could be made for their importance, not necessarily growing, but needing to be emphasized in our society. At least that's what I think, because I am Sean Michael Small, your host here of Talking Point on WESN, the content capital, broadcasting in HD, television with a difference, not afraid over the tantrums of those who would strongly disagree with our opinions. And let me just be upfront once again and say, we are equal opportunity critics here. We have no biases for anybody, particularly because as of right now, I am searching for anybody to rise up from the pack, differentiate themselves and say, hey, I could be the one to help point us in a better direction, or even a good direction. But there's some change coming on the horizon, so let's start off today's daily review. And the first change is one that is not necessarily surprising, although it was not also necessarily going to be assumed to automatically come to pass. There was a world where it could have been glossed over, and one could question the timing of the news, assuming that there's any legitimate intention to change the status quo. And what I'm speaking about in particular now is the fact that the Police Service Commission has apparently put out advertisements requesting applicants to put their name up, to send in their resumes, to make the case of why they could be candidates and subsequently selected to be the next Commissioner of Police. It's something we anticipated for quite some time. The Police Service Commission, they're responsible for disciplining, removing. They're responsible for the process of selecting the candidates, although not necessarily the final selection, of the Commissioner of Police. And the current Commissioner of Police, earlier Christopher, selected, I wouldn't say with much fanfare, but I do believe the nation wanted to, the best, hoped for the best, wanted to see her succeed, was disappointed a little bit after the first few months, was disappointed a little bit more in the subsequent months after that, and now we've reached the point where she has far more detractors than supporters, I believe, in the public sphere. And her contract was extended last year, and it should be coming up at the end of the month. So it goes back to what I mentioned earlier with regards to timing. Because the last couple of times the Service Commission had to do the exercise of putting together a merit list, etc., etc., it took a bit of time, more than a few weeks, more than a month. But now they are saying that the deadline for applicants is May the 3rd. Meanwhile, technically speaking, if this is an exercise in good faith to potentially replace, keyword potentially there, the incumbent commissioner, her contract is coming to a close, I believe on May the 24th of this year. So we have around 3 weeks, a little bit less than 3 weeks. I don't know if that's enough time because they opened up the application process. So it's not as though they could just look to who was here last time and just use that as a shortcut. The thing too is what I said, potential. Because the way how it's framed, at least by the news report that I read, it's not necessarily a given that the Service Commission is looking to outright replace EARLA. You know, it's just that potentially it can happen because they're looking at applicants, and one could make a reasonable assumption that they might still keep the incumbent under consideration, and who knows, maybe we might see another extension after they said that there's no one suitable for the post or more suitable than the current incumbent. Despite, I mean, it's slightly controversial. She's past the retirement age. She would need another extension, etc., etc. Now, it's easy to read into this either way. Either they want to move on from her and they're not necessarily trying to give it all of the fanfare, because after saying that Gary Griffith was a mistake, they don't want to now come and do and say anything. This is the government I'm speaking about, to imply that EARLA, as the follow-up substantive commissioner, was also a mistake. McDonald Jacobs was interim acting. Yes, this is coming from the Police Service Commission, but I still have questions about their independence, right? Questions that have yet to be answered, so we leave that up in the air. It could be that they're looking to, you know, softly replace her, or it could be that they're looking to give us an excuse to keep her. We went through the motions, didn't find anybody suitable, and there it is. Dare I say that the latter path might not be acceptable, no matter how true it might end up actually being. Although one could argue that within not necessarily the most senior ranks underneath the commissioner and deputy commissioners, but at the very least within the senior ranks, there are others who could at least have, the population that is, can have greater trust and confidence in. Similar to, I would argue, McDonald Jacobs. While we had criticisms of the acting commissioner of police, I would argue that we had a bit more trust and confidence in him. There were some few snafus, particularly when arguably he was lied to, not necessarily by the people who spoke to him, but by the officers involved in the PC Guild shooting. And that was not necessarily his best moment, but to some extent that wasn't necessarily his fault 100%. Meanwhile, everything that the current commissioner of police has done seemingly are errors of her own making. So it's hard to know if anybody would have trust and confidence in her, but now, ironically, we are asked to have trust and confidence in the Police Service Commission, an organization, an entity that is supposed to be a bit more in the background than the Commissioner of Police or elected officials, but one that has already been at the center of a controversy and at the center of a slightly controversial reforming based on how their predecessors disbanded. And this is the situation that we are relying on with the future selection of the Commissioner of Police after what arguably has been a great disappointment, given the fact that the far and away best candidate of the last selection, I believe that was the words used. I could be wrong. But the best candidate of the last election has so far shown to be not quite proficient enough at administration, strategy, or public communication. You know, certain key aspects of the job. So we wait and see. All right, let's move on to the next story. And this one, it's a bit of a tangent, and this is with regards to the father of Amara. This is one Mr. Shannon Lalite. I apologize if I got your name wrong. But the father of little Amara, having to deal with the loss of his daughter, expressed concerns, not necessarily blaming her mother, but expressed concerns about the rights of fathers, given the fact that he has made claims that he did not necessarily have access to his daughter. He had a difficult time visiting her. He had a difficult time communicating with her. He had a difficult time, even he made a comment that he would have to leave gifts with the neighbors for birthdays and Christmas, etc. When news came out of his daughter's death, he lamented the fact that potentially if his daughter was with him, she might have survived. That's a what if. It's not totally unreasonable, but you know, it's highly speculative. But I do think to some degree he has a point worth noting. Not necessarily it means that this pendulum has to swing 180 degrees the next way and then we overcompensate. But I do remember in a sociology class for my second degree, so it was a lot more recent than you would think. The lecturer at the time, I can't remember her name, good lecturer, she was a practicing, I believe, either sociologist or counselor, psychologist. I can't remember her specific field, but I knew that she worked with men who, to some extent, either felt alienated or may have gotten a bad break as single fathers, separated from their wives, particularly from the courts, because we make the assumption that the mother is best for the child. And to be fair, that might be true. I have no statistical data. It might be true for the majority of cases, maybe even the vast majority of cases, but that doesn't mean it's true for every single case. More importantly, there seems to be a bias with regards to authorities and courts over preferential treatment for the mother over the father. But there are nuances in how that is displayed. So it's not to say that we have this stark, simple problem and we just say fix it this way and it's fixed. It's a bit more nuanced than that, right? And of course, again, we don't want to overcompensate, but I do wonder if perhaps this opens the door. Like we have seen, you know, a past official has gone, has left us, and now an issue that he championed got a bit of a highlight. Not that we want to play politics or ideology or have ideological debates over the death of a toddler, but to some extent, the grief and the anguish of this father, his words are not the be-all and end-all, but let it open the door to something that perhaps we are late to the game with and could give a little more consideration. That doesn't actually mean that the results need to change drastically, but the approach of how we get there, at the very least, could be improved. All right, next story. This is something quick I wanted to mention. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Emery Brown, he made the point that our classification, our status, and our rating with Canada has not necessarily changed, right? This coming off of the heels of a travel advisory where specific statements were made, but the classification of the advisory category has not necessarily changed. So officially our status with the advisory, the technical position that we have has not changed. We are not acknowledged as worse off than we were recently before. Also, the risk rating for our country has not changed. So it's interesting, they sent out the advisory, and perhaps it could just be a reminder. And the ugly truth of the reminder is still not something pleasant to us living in TNT. But, I mean, this is what it actually means, the intentions or the unstated intentions of the Canadian government. Of course, we are not necessarily going to know. I would still hope that we could work towards, I don't know, improving the rating. But it's not as though we're in bad company, I guess you could say. We have regional neighbors in the same advisory category as us. the Bahamas, Guyana, Jamaica, as well as the UK, Denmark, India, Spain, and Germany. So perhaps it's not all that bad. Everywhere has some degree of risk and danger. We just live here in the risk and danger here. But let's move on. Something that's interesting, and it's difficult to proclaim anything definitive yet because no one has necessarily come out to say, to speak in any direct terms to affirm or to cement any sort of position or stance. However, there is a three-way battle for the constituency of St. Joseph. Apparently, not only is the political leader of the NTA being put up to challenge the seat, but also one current opposition senator, Arnold Roberts. And this situation puts the whole partnership in quotations, alliance, well, it leads us on the outside naturally having some questions because, and here's the thing, when spoken to with the media, Senator Roberts was asked direct questions, I believe, relatively speaking, about working with the NTA, what does this mean about Gary Griffith's contestation of the seat, because, well, that's the one seat of the NTA is that got fanfare because it's the political leader. And the political leader of the NTA, for better or worse, got fanfare. Wanted fanfare, we don't know, right? And Senator Roberts answered with phrases like, well, we will beat the PNM. We will beat the PNM. We will give the PNM licks, things like that, right? Didn't necessarily speak directly to what could be an ally in Gary Griffith, because one would assume if he wins the seat, he was making affirmations that the UNC will win the seat. That means that the NTA will lose the seats. And I'm not entirely sure what would happen if the political leader of a party is not in Parliament. I mean, we've already seen the minority leader of the Tribune Council, he's not an NTHA, but that's somewhat of a different matter because let's just say the NTA does get the majority somehow, but Gary doesn't win his seat. Unlikely, I know. The thing is, there is talk of an alliance between the NTA and the UNC, right? There is an assumption to some degree by the public that this should be easy, you know, low-hanging fruit, because we saw an alliance in the local government election, but also because these are the people involved in the partnership. So, you know, technically their greatest success came when they worked together, although one could argue also one of their greatest defeats came when they were still working together in the follow-up election. But given the fact that the UNC did not win the subsequent follow-up and last general election, reinforcements might be needed, but we have heard claims from the political leader of the NTA with regards to internal disagreements, shall we phrase it, within the UNC over partnering with the NTA, despite the fact that it seemed as though the NTA and the PP were debating each other about who had the right to be in alliance with the UNC because they didn't want to both be in alliance with the UNC. The thing is, the way right now, how it's being phrased, Gary Griffith is keeping the door open, it would seem. And Anna Roberts is not so much keeping the door open as opposed to maybe not letting it close, if you could appreciate the subtle difference. It's not that he's trying to, well, based on his statements, so I'm inferring a lot here. It's not that he was saying anything directly about Gary and the potential of an alliance. He just didn't say that there was no alliance and there was no potential for one. So it seems as though the situation is still up in the air. Now, we still have basically a year to go, give or take a month or two, one way or the other. I'm not entirely sure. It's not guaranteed when elections will be called for. We might get a surprise announcement and say, you know, September elections, bam. But there's time. But the flip side is, one could argue, a last-minute jump to come together might be a bit sloppy and might not necessarily serve each other well. And then we do have to ask, to what extent does the UNC view Senator Roberts as a strong candidate? I have no idea. Because they're going up against, they've put him up against, arguably, one would think the political leader of a party should be that party's strongest candidate, although he's not necessarily going up for a safe seat. So how this all plays out, because there is possibility for further election excitement. Let's use that word. Let's not use the other word I want to use. Let's not be accused of being incendiary and blah, 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 and all of those things that politicians like to say when they get defensive while using incendiary language against the person who they feel threatened by. Hinted, wink, wink. Now, moving on. Oh, where's my rundown? Last story I wanted to just briefly mention. The Chief Secretary of the THA, Farley Augustine, he is quite confident about being absolved, him and his executive, over the AudioGate matter. And I don't understand exactly why he has confidence in that statement, because even though to some extent I am having to somewhat, I don't know, put my opinion of that matter in a silo and try to treat with him objectively and not necessarily let that completely color my opinion of him and his executive, there is literally no way I could see that that situation could be spun. We're not even talking about genuine having a good explanation, because his explanation was not a good one. There's no way I could see that it could be spun into anything not negative, much less positive. Because, and the report on this reiterated the argument that the Chief Secretary said it was a strategy to be considered and one that we did not ultimately undertake, except one could argue that utilizing fake social media profiles to help direct the narrative over conversations and discussions on social media about issues that affect Tobago in the national sphere, and potentially the popularity of the then PDP, now TPP, with regard to the national conversation of our political landscape, to utilize fake profiles to do politicking on social media, I don't think is technically anywhere within the official sphere of THA business. And the argument that the Chief Secretary is making was this is a strategy for their executive, not for their political party. Because their government body was considering every potential strategy. But this is a political strategy, not even necessarily a good political strategy. Good, not to say effective, or it probably is effective. It's not good in the sense of it's probably not ethical. So point number one, I don't think that this has any business to be done within the official framework of the THA. But point number two, the fact that you say, oh, we're willing to consider any strategy. What exactly does that mean? Just because the other side does it, that means you're willing to do it? And I said something to the effect earlier on this week, I believe, about, and even at the top of the show, rising above. Rising above means I do not stoop as low as the others. I do not copy the others in their nonsense. I do not look just as bad. I do not make myself look just as bad. Because I am willing to go as low as they are willing to go, to wallow in the dirt just like them. Because they do it, we have to fight fire with fire. Think about it. The analogy really kind of solves itself in most cases, right? There are situations where you do fight fire with fire. You do fight wildfires at times by using controlled fires to cut off the path of its spread. But for the most part, there has never been a house fire that has been outed by lighting parts of it that have not been burning on fire. That's not a strategy that works in all cases. Hence, the analogy doesn't work in all cases. The practice, the implied stratagem doesn't work in all cases. And I would argue in here, you would have been better served, Chief Sec, by differentiating yourself from your political opponents, not joining them in all of the things that we don't like about them, which led the people of Tobago to elect you in the first place. All right, that's it for me. Well, that's it for my solo thoughts. Let's take a break. I will be joined with switching gears, of course, arts and culture in the limelight. Some news of national importance in the sphere. Stay tuned to Talking Point on WSN. We'll be right back after this. Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
This is 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for, it's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man
is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
And I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement. If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
let's go to the last part.
Coming soon to WESN.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why.
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say, we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren. Coming soon to WESN.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. a father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the home store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop Ariapita Avenue Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this: screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
Welcome back to Talk About on WESN Content Capital, and I am joined by arts and culture contributor and also the president and assistant conductor of UE Arts Chorale, and with him is the legend himself, Mr. Jessel Murray, the head of the Department of Creative and Festival Arts at UE. Gentlemen, good morning. Happy to have you all here once again.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is always a pleasure to be here in Port of Spain. Not much traffic this morning, actually.
Well, that's good.
Yes.
This was actually the most traffic I got this week. So
really?
It's strange how it works out that way. When the highway is full, I'm moving around, so I'm like, oh, this is nice. It's clear.
Yeah.
And the reverse. So it's something about the flow, I think.
No. This morning is wonderful.
Yeah,
well, I shouldn't say wonderful.
There's still traffic.
It was an easy commute. Yes.
So, of course, we just saw a clip there of the chorale, and you two both are, well, Mr. Murray, of course, is well known with your participation in the artistic sphere. Mark is getting to be well known with all the various areas of his involvement. One of the things, of course, you hear the music that typically choirs do, not always going to be the music that all of the various genres that are popular, right? one of the interesting things is both with regards to traditional genres and modern commercial genres is the need to some extent for competitions, as Mark brought up this point. And I think to some extent it's actually true. We just got news that Soca Monarch, which we didn't have this year, will be back next year. We just had Music Festival.
Yes.
And these two things for their respective artists, I guess you could say, and some music festival winners might end up going to Soca Monarch.
Yes, indeed.
The stage that it provides in a small country like TNT, the opportunities that it potentially will then create for those who excel, whether they win or not, but once they have a good showing of themselves, I wonder if perhaps we underestimate it a little bit, because even though Soca Monarch, some of the artists say, you know, it's important for the new up-and-coming artists, the public did not necessarily support it enough to keep it around this year gone. So now, hopefully, we'll get something good enough next year.
Well, first of all, you're always talking about something which, of course, we call the orange economy, that economy of intangibles. That's one of the buzzwords right now. Believe me, Trinidad and Tobago needs the orange economy because the black economy, which is the oil and the gas, is disappearing. We are not Guyana. Let's face up to where we are. Now, you speak about Soca Monarch. Any of the artistic endeavors can never depend, and we certainly, although we were just talking about budgets, none of those can ever depend on just who comes in the gate. You're always going to need some type of corporate in our particular society, as well as perhaps some governmental subventions in order to be successful. Gate receipts alone is not going to be there. And on top of that, gate people, as we know in the business, audiences can be fickle. So if you just depend on them all the time, unless you're doing fresh product every single time, and you have some sort of dedicated audience, it's not going to be enough. I'm glad that you spoke about the music festival, because the music festival, of which I used to be the national chair, I'm now the South Central chair, and of course it just passed as well. And yes, it's an amateur festival, but we are grooming persons to be in any part, to partake of the professional sphere, whether it's Soca Monarch, whether it's jazz, whether it's anything else that will take people to the next level, because and Music Festival, unapologetically, is based on the classical arts. We are based on the classical arts, which we leave as a training ground for just about any area you want to go to. If you don't have the classical arts, you don't have technique, you don't have staying power. We're not saying that the other arts don't have it, but the classical arts does ground you, and it allows you to go this way. All right.
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, maybe some people might want to say certain demanding modern vocal styles around like R&B might...
Can't sustain those unless you have...
I mean, from what I understand, one vocal coach, he was under the belief, and I think he had some merit to say, like, Whitney Houston believed to have a powerful voice. Yes, the voice naturally was powerful, but he believed that she didn't necessarily have technique, which is why her voice seemingly faded out, whereas Celine Dion's voice, who very much was centered around good technique and maintaining it, she was able to maintain it well into her
she still is.
She still is. Other concerns are what's slowing her down, not her voice.
That's correct.
And I was thinking, yes, classical music for vocalists, right? I mean, I know even less, right? I don't know as much as you with regards to vocalists, but I know even less about instrumentals. But for vocalists, for technique, to develop it, because we have some old school soca artists, calypso artists, who they might have abandoned their technique for the genre back in the day, and then their voice suffered because of it.
Yes, unless your genetics just tell you that you naturally have, some people, genetics, they can do whatever they want and they're going to last. Right. Unfortunately, not everybody has those genetics. Even instrumentalists. Same thing, we have a lot of pan players, plus others. If you don't have the proper technique, and we are seeing too many students now who are walking around with wristbands because they have everything from carpal tunnel to tendonitis, because there's not the proper development of the technique. Pianists as well. We are both pianists, yeah. If you don't develop proper technique and you're trying to put in the work, you're going to damage yourself. It's a sports-related injury.
Injury, yeah.
So therefore, what we have to do is to get that grounded technique technique, whichever way it is. There are many different techniques, but technique is about strengthening, about finding your own initial weaknesses, and then learning how to produce.
And one thing that I wanted to say, good technique, the artistry does not have to suffer because of good technique.
You learn classical and then you figure out how to apply
exactly.
that.
So in a singer's case, once you know how your voice works, and I'm assuming you have a really good coach on your hands.
Right.
Once you have a really good coach and you have that proper grounding in the technique, then you can apply that technique to any sort of genre that you can. The artistry does not have to suffer, because some people think of it as two different things. Some people think, to get this, I do have to kind of abandon some of my technique a little bit. No, it's not. That's not the case. That's not the case.
This reminds me of a video I saw online very recently. It was a TikTok meme, classical pianists before the pandemic and playing, I think, something from Mozart or Beethoven. Classical pianists after the pandemic and started a piano riff from Snoop Dogg. Or during the pandemic, right? But I think at the end of the day, though, it's not just somebody that could play that little, pop music, which is a lot, to some extent, simpler. It's someone that has the backing of the technique. But so we have competitions to try to advance technique. I mean, I have been a part of 2 music festivals, ironically, in my 7 years. We only went to 2 at the time. I'm not sure if there were any in between.
This was in the school choir?
Yes.
No, music festivals are biannual.
No, but when I was in secondary school, we only went twice. When I was in Form 2 and when I was in Upper 6, we didn't go in between.
You all missed one.
So I don't know if we missed one or if they. Okay.
Yeah.
It's possible we just didn't decide on quite
that's for whatever reason.
But back then we didn't have all of the education that we have now. I would argue, right? Music class did not necessarily go into technique. I had to go to an outside vocal coach myself. One would think, okay, we have so many graduates coming out, we have more people being educated to be educators, but there seemingly still seems to be a disconnect or a lacking.
Well, there's a disconnect. But look, the landscape and certainly Music Festival is moving into its post-mortem soon. One of the things that we have to recognize is that the landscape has changed markedly from even when you went to school. I took part in Music Festival. Music Festival was the thing. Right? Music Festival is now one of many things that are occurring in terms of festivals. Music teachers, and I must say DCFA, Creative and Festival Arts, yes, we are churning out persons of quality. I'm very proud to say, you're not leaving St. Augustine until we guarantee that you know what you're going to be doing. However, the landscape now is that there is actually more general music teaching going on, which takes up time. Right? In many days, I remember that, bless her soul, that there wasn't as much teaching where I went to school. There was teaching, make no mistake, wonderful music teacher, but there was a heavy emphasis on choirs, which was great. I mean, I got my grounding, and I'm very grateful to Lindy Ann Boddenrich for that. But now there's definitely more emphasis on the general music things and examinable things. There was no CSEC music, which takes up a lot of music teachers' times.
Right.
There used to be the dreaded exam at the end of Form 3, I've forgotten the name, and everybody should forget the name, where everybody had to do this Form 3 exam, which included music, where you had to teach basically towards that. That's been thrown out. But still, there's that. Then there are other types of festivals. There's a growing interest in Junior Panorama. So there are lots of things going on that teachers have to pay attention to. And in many cases, there's either 1 or 2 music teachers for an entire school. And I have to bless their souls that they're managing to keep it all together. And then we bring Music Festival every 2 years. And we're trying to encourage how can we get them to fit that into their particular schedules.
I think our issues were my music teachers in Fatima at the time, Miss Cumberbatch and Mr. Brash, well-known names, but they were also French teachers.
But they weren't music teachers, they were French teachers first.
They were French, right.
Who were beautiful at music.
Form 1 and Form 2 music, we didn't go past that.
Yes.
So that was the thing, right?
Right.
But back to competitions though, one of the things I remember when I went to the first music festival, I was in Form 2, they were Form 1s who were younger than me. And in one case, one of our school's participants, he kind of cracked under the pressure a little bit on stage, the old Queen's Hall stage. I mean, to his credit, he sang through his song in tears, but it got to him. And I do wonder, because I am not someone that cares too much for the competition aspect of those things, right? Is it perhaps this I'm just wondering if there's maybe some negatives about trying to say, well, we're going to compete in art. You know, it's not like we're going to compete in record sales, because art is subjective. But when we want to say criteria, and this one is supposedly objectively better than that one.
Yeah, you know, and that, there's something to be said for that. But you know what? The positive side of competition is that you get your juices going. And then the business of art creation, especially performing arts, is pressure. And therefore, if you have to get on a stage, it's going to be pressure. And if you can't do the pressure, what we do, an adjudicator should always be sensitive in terms of the comments. Things went well. Don't tell them everything went well if everything fell apart. Things went well, however, we will fix this and over time. And that's why really an adjudicator should never really be talking too much about executive technique. They should talk about the outcome of what is there, because there are different techniques to arrive. But you really have, performing arts is heavily competitive.
Yes.
And therefore, you're trying to find those, I have to say, those few persons who are going to be able to go on to pre-professional and professional careers. The only way to get it done, really, you've got to go out there and face the beast, which is your audience.
Right. Well, it prepares you for that, because not everyone is going to, even when you become a professional, not everyone is going to like your music. Not everyone is going to like it, so it sort of prepares you, prepares you for that.
What about the aspect of collaboration in the music sphere?
On what level?
Well, I do think, professionally speaking, or in projects, you know, some of the best works come from collaboration. But then, of course, commercial music is littered with, well, this group broke up and that group broke up, and so on and so on. Creative differences, which, I mean, my favorite band of all time, The Police, you know, just three guys could not keep it together, right?
No, but those are different types, and those are more, sometimes it's more extra musical things that tear them apart, and just the long days and things of touring and everything else. Those things drive people apart. But you're correct, collaboration, and DCFA, we are trying, and one of our things for next year is collaboration even across the arts. So, of course, this weekend coming up, next weekend coming up, and I'm taking that sphere, where we have our concert, a grandiose affair. We have a collaboration between two of our major things. In fact, we are doing two things of which I'm very proud. One, we are premiering a major work for Steel Band. And Steel Band needs major works, not just, I'm sorry, whoever vexed when I say that, not just simply panorama arrangements.
Well, before we go any further, we have a couple of clips. We got one clips of choir preparation from the past, but we have another clip of the Arts Chorale. Let's run that clip here. You might recognize the person, one of the people on the set might be running this rehearsal. Let's play one of the clips. My friend Mark. Oh my! Leading the room.
Hey. Yes, no, that was that is a piece that we had to do for UE's matriculation ceremony last semester, and we're doing it again this concert. So if you want to see that, it'll be a great thing.
One of the things in all of these clips that impressed me was the precision of the pronunciation, the diction. It was very, to the point where it almost sounds like it's a set of British students. But I'm like, no, it's not that they have an accent, it's just that it's so, you know, precise on all the ball.
Why British as against Trinidadian students who are on Trinidad, Tobago and regional students?
That's why I said almost.
But why almost? The British are the British. I respectfully disagree. No, these are people just like, this is what you would have looked like, it's just that you didn't recognize it at the time. That's what you would have done in your school days. You're not British, you're from Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore this is the precision that we do now in our own particular way. We are saying that the British are wonderful and they have their sense of precision. Trinidad and Tobago, we are precise and professional. That's what I want to say.
I don't doubt you. We were going towards the same point, right? Just with different words. But
I'm not invoking our colonial masters. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
boy. we will save independence debates for another forum. But speaking about PAN, because of course you're also involved with UE Art Steel, we do have a clip now, and this is of the legend himself. Well, wait, I'm not sure if it's you conducting the Steel Orchestra in this clip. And also in the background is, I believe it will be the Arts Chorale as well behind the PAN. But let's run a clip of Steel. And there it is, a grandiose affair. That, of course, was a rehearsal for a different performance, but we saw the two groups coming together.
Right.
And
well, actually, that was a wonderful experience. What they didn't show is that they were actually, in the end, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 groups. Yes. On the conductor's left was the Lydians, on the right was the Southerners, upstage was UE Arts Chorale, National Steel on the right, UE Arts Chorale and Lydians here, all together.
Lydian Steel and the...
And UE Arts Chorale and National Steel.
Yes.
Yes,
okay, so...
Speaking of collaborations,
That's,
you know, that was...
I do remember... Love Movement did something with, I think it was the youth orchestra one time.
Okay.
And I've seen the second music festival I was at, they actually got all of the senior girls choirs together to do one of the pieces, one of the adjudicators. That was a treat.
It definitely.
Because one would think, oh, you have different choirs and they sing the same piece, they'll all sound the same. No, they all sounded different. So then when they came together, it was definitely more than the sum of its parts.
Yes, yes.
Now, I mean, you all have a concert coming up, a grandiose affair.
Grandiose affair.
You started saying Steel Pan particularly needed more pieces.
Steel Pan, we need to get much more original pieces.
Not just calypso pieces, but
in
general.
Original calypso pieces, of course. In fact, this particular piece that we're premiering by my colleague, senior lecturer at the University of the West, is Janine Remy. She's an avid composer of steel band music for solo with piano. She keeps creating piano parts for me to play, which I keep telling her she needs to go to bed earlier because
I've played some of those as well.
They're quite complicated but wonderful to play. But she's created this 6-movement piece, which is called Dancing on Steel. And the 6 movements, 5 of them are based on West African rhythms. Some of them very familiar. One of them is a beautiful piece which actually you don't have to know what's happening to know that there's stick fighting in it. That's what I would say. You have to come and see it to hear how it evokes stick fighting. Brilliant piece, part of it, one of the movements. And of course it ends with, she created her own panorama. She created her own calypso and her own panorama arrangement based on that. So 6 original movements. We had done 2 of them as a treat last year as a preview in December. Now we're doing the entire 6 with dancers from our UE Festival dance, which is also from the DCFA. And so this is a body of music, which is, again, it's her present, it's her addition to the repertoire. One of the things I find as a steel band conductor, and of course UE Art Steel is I co-conductor along with Keon Delas, who himself is a brilliant steel player, and he's also a conductor, is that we are always searching for original music for the steel. We do adaptations, which is nice, and we do the arrangements that we do, but original music created with the steel in mind.
Well, to some extent, like classical music right now is mainly dominated by soundtracks, whether it's film, or video
music.
games, right?
That's
but
film
like,
music.
is there new classical pieces also being generated?
All the time. Some of it is what we call accessible, meaning that, and of course film music is a type of classical type music, as is a video game. Some of it is very accessible, and some of it is experimental, where a second hearing would be more persuasive. That's a diplomatic way of saying it.
But now looking at our country to kind of like bring this whole process back, y'all are having a concert where y'all are exhibiting original pieces,
yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily everything is an original piece,
yes.
but you're exhibiting original pieces. The work for our little nation to generate original pieces, would you say, it's heading in a good direction, it's sufficient, we could be doing more, we need to be doing more?
We must be doing much more. Right now there's a musical, first of all, Pantopia, which is based on the musical, going on again this weekend, music based on Ray Holman. Ray Holman is a person, UE Arts Chorale under their, UE Arts Steel under their former name, UE Festival Steel. We recorded a compact disc of 6 original Ray Holman pieces. And it was a treat, and we still do one of them. One of them is still extremely popular, the Waltz for Iris. And so Ray Holman has a body. Jit Samaru, besides his panorama arrangements, I've done original works by Jit Samaru created for steel. And these are the sort of things we want to encourage anybody else to do. I've done work, Bugsy Sharp created a work from in the rainforest for the 2000 World Steel Band Festival, which when I was with the National Steel, we revived in 2014, did a revised arrangement with extra percussion and presented it. It was the first time in 14 years that somebody had done it. These are the sort of things which I really want us to be able to do, and I'm very invested in that as part of and that's the UE Arts Steel as well. The chorale, same thing. One of the pieces we do at the top of the program is actually a coronation anthem, which was done recently for King Charles' coronation, but it's a Handel piece which stands on its own. But the orchestration was redone for steel and works perfectly. It's a 10-minute piece which opens our program, The Grandiose Affair.
So Mark, now I don't expect you to compose for steel, but
I mean, why not?
Maybe you could. That's true. That's true. Why not?
I'll find your bowl.
So when could we, maybe have some original works coming down the pipe from one Mr. Peter?
Well, you're asking that, putting him on. People ask me, but don't you compose? No, I don't. I have no interest whatsoever.
Okay.
None. Whatsoever. But do I have interest in commissioning and performing new works? Absolutely. All the time. One of the pieces that we did a few years ago, again with the National Steel, was a piece called Caprice, and an American composer. It was actually created for symphonic orchestra with steel as a 5th independent part of it, and we premiered that in Queen's Hall. Yeah, so there are things like that where all of these are pieces constantly which can be done and should be done, because our national instrument needs more than, and I have to say simply, great works are being done for Panorama, but then a lot of those great works, unfortunately, are never performed again. Right?
But
that's a
and
problem.
also there's debate about the source of Panorama pieces, for calypsos made for Panorama, for Pan, or adapting soca songs, and where have the composers gone, and at times, we get the carnival side of steel pan composition highlighted in Panorama. We don't necessarily get the other months of the year side of composition.
None of those works can't stand in other parts of the year, but they're created for a specific moment in time. They can be adapted and have been done. And for instance, I've worked on a project with the NGC where they have had some of their works from their steel bands transcribed, and so there's longevity. And actually, we did it as a project. I was the lead on that, and my colleagues did the sort of groundwork where we actually adapted it for primary school, secondary school, and professional level. So all of these things, we're looking to create more repertoire for our steel orchestras to perform. And of course, it will rebound to the benefit of just about anybody who are going to do that.
All right, so we're going to have to cut this conversation short here. We have to take a break. Can y'all stay for calls, or do y'all have to leave?
He would probably have to stay.
You have to go?
Yes.
All right, so Mr. Murray, the legendary. The living legend. Let's celebrate our people, folks, while they're still here. That's one of the lessons that I came out from our recent losses, and of course, Mr. Pandey and others at the top of the year as well, who we lost. Let's not just celebrate them after they're gone. So please put up with me.
Thank you.
Put up with, right? And now we have a flyer for that concert coming up on Saturday, the April 20th. If you can see the flyer there, a grandiose affair presented by UE Arts Chorale and UE Arts Steel. Of course, one of the musical directors is Mr. Murray himself, and it features the world premiere of Dancing on Steel by Dr. Janine Remy, 7 p.m. at the Bmobile. Tickets are $150.
Yes.
Yeah, that is cheap, folks. That is very cheap. That is very cheap.
Yes.
In a strange way, I myself am being priced out of certain productions, although I can't necessarily lament to see people actually are willing to pay over $500 for the arts in TNT. To some extent, if you could get an event that will get the patronage, do it.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Murray.
Thank you.
That is true.
Yes.
That is true. And you heard some of the quality with just some of the clips, folks. But we have to take a break. When we come back, we open the phone line. Stay tuned to talk upon a WESN. Maybe Mark will stay with me and not leave me by myself. We say adieu to the legend himself. We'll be right back after this.
Thank you very much.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the home store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop Ariapita Avenue Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available
a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next to Seth. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have 2 of the 3 species of anteaters right here.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen. Show Michael Small, Mark Anthony Peter still with me here. We just had Mr. Justin Murray, who, you know, I mean, his knowledge and opinions are so broad and expansive that we may not have necessarily delved as deep as some might like in music festivals specifically. But
next time it rolls around, we can talk about it. One thing that I wanted to say, you brought up the fact of, you brought up the point that there are these groups that are formed and there's these collaborations, and then all of a sudden things just sort of, they break up, they do all of those things. One thing that I've learned, try not to, especially in this business, try not to get caught up in things that don't concern you. Meaning, stay focused on the work, stay focused on the goals, stay focused on the purpose. Everything else is just sort of a distraction, I'll call it, right? So when you get caught up in the extra things, it sort of taints what the real goal is, what the real job is, especially something with as unique as art.
Because one of the things that I always find curious, this is a different type of performing arts in the world of magicians. Penn and Teller, one of the most famous magical acts in the world, they have gone on record to say, you know, we are not friends. And one could argue, you know, they know each other's families to some extent, you know, in the loose definition of the term, they are friends. But I think they emphasize the point to kind of say, well, no, we're not necessarily going to be as close as you think we are. We have a working relationship first and foremost. And they have been able to kind of understand that they don't have the same strengths. You know, Penn repeatedly says Teller's the better magician, although one could argue Penn's presentations are very important to the act and his capacity to speak on his feet, as well as to perform parts of the act as well.
So they each have different skill sets that work.
But they also, they don't forget that.
Exactly.
They don't forget the formula.
It doesn't become personal. It doesn't become a personal thing. And we've seen,
because they have disagreements. That's the thing. Their styles are different, so they have disagreements. But they realize the whole point is to have those differences.
As a co-worker, and I'm gonna you showed a clip when Mr. Murray described there were actually more forces. So the UE Deaf UE Development and Endowment Fund, they had a fundraising concert. It was produced by some really good colleagues of mine, MW Productions. And so they brought all of these different entities together. So you had your segment, so you asked Coral and you asked, we had our segment. Southerners had their segment, Lydians, etc., etc. But when it came to that last piece that that we showed, Lydians, Southerners in front, UE Steel, NSSO National Steel, Lydian Steel, UE Coral. At the end of the day, we all recognize that there's a particular purpose, and the particular purpose is to execute this song and to make this concert as great as it can be. And it was, right? An arrangement of High Mass by Anton Williams, a graduate of the DCFA, right, and a colleague of mine. All of these things, again, about the collaboration, all of these things make sense because when you are constantly in your bubble, especially in a choral setting or any sort of group, when you're in that bubble all of the time, the thought of, oh my gosh, we're singing with another group, how is this going to be, how is this going to work out, who's going to be the director, etc., etc., and it worked.
I will say this, at least back earlier in my time in choirs, there was a greater sense of competition, at least between two of the choirs, who I will not name, right? That may or may not still exist to this day, right? And I will not name it. And it's not always so easy. I was a part of a concert in Bmobile that included Signal Hill, the Marionettes, Lydians, Love Movement, and I think the Southerners, we did not have that let's all be on stage moment though, unfortunately. That might have been quite an interesting experience. But say la vie. I did actually perform in a Marionettes concert though.
Okay.
As part of Fatima's senior choir music rehearsal, they invited the choir. You know, there's some recruiting shenanigans going on, but it was interesting to see how another organization they did their thing.
Exactly, listen,
and what they thought of as choreography and placements. Anyway, collaboration, and I'll get to a wider.
Speaking from a place of bias.
I'll get to a wider comment, but the phone lines are open, folks. You could call and have your say. Of course, last chance of the week to speak about anything that you find important. I know, ironically, just last week, Friday, the Privy Council situation debate was quite important here on Talking Point, and that has come up again later on in this week, of course, with the funeral of former Judge Lavasti. But you did say collaboration and coming together to do the work, and I do wonder if, and this is where arts education has applications outside of just singing and dancing and painting, right? This is, you learn the lessons there and translate that into other aspects of life in the business world.
Exactly. I remember I was having a conversation with a new student. He's in the first year certificate. If he's watching this, he's know I'm talking about him. So there's a very beneficial thing when you get into the certificate, regardless of what your main instrument is. We let you take, the DCFA lets you take either a semester or 2 semesters of PAT. And I had to, and he was like, why? I'm a singer. I was like, first of all, you're from Trinidad and Tobago. This is our national instrument. Second of all, as a graduate, somebody who's gone through tertiary level learning and from Trinidad and Tobago, and you don't have an idea of how to play pan, at the end of the day, you know, you need to be sort of an all-rounded musician. If we wanted to hire a singer, we could have gone to any karaoke bar and hired anyone who sounds good. But you're here to become more than a singer. You're here to become an all-rounded musician, right? And again I said, singing is not going to be the only thing that you do. You know, when your back is against the wall and rent is due, and the DCFA has given you all of these skills and you've learned all of these things, then you can branch out into different things.
Well, I mean, but I was even going a step further than that, right? Because like that lesson there that student was taught, why are you limiting yourself? Point number one. Right? Point number two, you don't like something, you don't want to do something. You know, in the professional world, you have to learn how to do things you don't like and things that you don't want to do. So there are at least 2 lessons there that will help potentially improve self-discipline, right? But also get someone to be comfortable in situations that they don't want to be in, that they're not comfortable in. Because a lot of what the world of work is navigating discomfort, personalities that you might not like, personalities that might not like you, you know, having to at times, because the person in charge or the son of the person in charge or the consensus of the group, right, might be so in disagreement to you, and it might legitimately be not the best way to do it, and that could frustrate a lot of people when it is readily apparent to you or to others that it's not the best way to do it. But anyone that's been in an organization doing anything will know, whether it's music, whether it's raising funds for charity, whether it's cooking, whether it's office work, at times you just have to bite some bullets and let things go.
And I would rather go through the discomfort in a field that I like, rather than going through discomfort in a job, in a career setting that I don't like or that I have no attachment to, that I have no passion for. You know, there will be discomfort along the way through life, anything. And there's a book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving. Yeah, everybody knows what that book is. In life, sometimes there are problems that you pick and there are problems that you don't pick.
Subtle Art of Not Giving Up. Right.
Yeah, Subtle Art of Not Giving Out.
Let's spell it out.
It's a great book. I recommend, I'm not getting paid for this, but I recommend anyone. And in one of the chapters, the artist, he said, the author, he said, sometimes you have to, in life, sometimes you get to pick your problems. Sometimes you don't get to pick your problems. But if it was a problem of, discomfort in a field that I enjoy, i.e. music, i.e. visual arts, i.e. performing, i.e. dance, whatever it may be, or problems in a field that I went into because I had no other choice or because I felt like I had to do something. Because any artist will tell you the 9 to 5s, the 8 to 4s, they don't really work for us, right? So we have to do some sort of hustling. We have to do some sort of career making, right?
It's funny that you said that one of the most successful rappers in the world, Eminem, he literally approaches his music career as a job. He comes to the studio in the morning, he leaves in the studio in the afternoon, and like people who he collaborated when they first, start the collaboration, they're coming in and he's like, all right, I'll see you later because I've been here all day.
Exactly.
And then they have to learn, whoa, this is a different level of professionalism.
Yeah. Because you come in, you do your work, and you leave. It's not the sit down in an office behind in a
it's still,
cubicle.
it's still not that.
Exactly, behind a computer screen.
Just before we go any further, folks, you can interrupt the conversation and join and have your say, but I will admit I am enjoying the conversation, so I'm not going to feel sad if no one interrupts us.
That's okay. I would, if anybody does call, I would like to know people's thoughts on the how people felt about when the Soca Monarch had to be discontinued, and how and the thoughts of it coming back, because the Minister of Tourism at the Tuco Awards giving, he said he's calling for collaborations, he's calling for partnerships, and there's a little bit of a parallel there because we had No Tobago Jazz this year, right? And when it was there was an era where it was being discussed, is this something that is profitable in more ways than just financial, right? And I believe it was the Chief Secretary who said, the Chief Secretary did also call for partnerships and collaborations, but no one took him on. Right?
I think before it reached this point.
Before it reached this point. So it's because, when the admin team went in, they realized, this is not the losses are just getting bigger and bigger. Right, but at the end of the day, we have to think about not just the event itself, but the greater impact it will have on the economy, right?
And society.
And society, because even though the event itself in ticket sales may not make a profit, at the end of the day, people will still engage the vendors outside of that scope in the economy in Tobago. So then the government, that will be returned in taxes, obviously.
Also, it's more apparent with Soca Monarch, right? The cultural event that it is for TNT and to some extent around the world. But even Jazz Festival, to some degree, having events like that, the key point, I think, is if you're building towards something, as opposed to if you're just kind of mucking around, making losses instead of profit, and you're not building towards anything, the losses could be the cost of building towards something, but if it's, not actually contributing to anything, then it's like, But moving back though, for the time that we have left, because when we're speaking about, getting out of your comfort zone, having to do things that you would like to do, one of the things, a lot of times sports is looked at, and I think for very much similar reasons, as a way to build discipline in young men and women. And to some extent, music can also do that. The having to practice an instrument, having to make rehearsals, having to collaborate with other people to respect other people's times, it also discipline. But there's also an aspect about art, which I think at times, it gets a bad rap, but there's some truth to it. A lot of people see social media and they're like, oh, I could do that. And the problem with that is, yes, there will be the rare unicorns that are just, I am so naturally talented. Different type of performing arts. A social media influencer, Logan Paul, he has proven, ironically or unironically, to be literally one of the most naturally gifted professional wrestlers, which is more of a performing art, a very physically demanding performing art than a true competitive sport. But the point is a combination of his personality and his physical skills. He just adapted to that so quickly, but not everybody's going to adapt to some sort of performing art that quickly. And then I do feel if you don't go through a proper education, it's very easy for two things to happen. You kind of give up. Or you are the struggling artist, forever struggling artist that gives up on everything, but you're not giving up on the struggling, being the struggling artist. Right?
Yeah, so that's very interesting that you brought that up. Another conversation I was having. I talk to these students all of the time. When I'll get this back to my experience. When you are a degree student at DCFA, UE makes you do courses. that are not.
I remember you called me about one of them.
Yeah,
and it was like, I think it was like one of the first times you had to write an academic paper, and as a music student, you have not to do that since what, A-levels or O-levels?
Well, no, we write academic papers about music, but we had to write an academic paper about something that
that's not music.
So I did something that's these things called foundation courses, and in my second year, I had to do a course called Law and Governance. Right.
Definitely not music.
Definitely not music. But I was able to learn about how the Privy Council and all of these different court things and laws work.
Which matters to artists.
Which matters, right? I also had to do a course called Science, Medicine, and Technology. Right?
And we just spoke about, repetitive motion injuries.
Yeah, right.
To instrumentalists.
So, and it gave you scientific skills, the skills about deducing and difference between deducing and all of those things.
That's also good, one could argue, for formulating arguments, for having to communicate with large groups of people, which in the music scene.
And the irony is, as scary as university might seem, it's actually a safe space for you to make your mistakes. Because at the end of the day, if you are on some level, if you are on some level still young, whether you're young or young at heart, regardless of your age, there are certain things that you don't know and that you've not gone through.
Yes.
And university life does you are allowed to sort of go through that on some level, and it's a safe space to make those mistakes.
It's mostly a safe space. I do have an anecdote to give. One of the things is, you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
So I started a tertiary program and I suspended or stopped partway, and then when I picked it back up, I still didn't necessarily know how to properly write an academic paper, right? And my entire class, various ages, I was one of the oldest, but not necessarily the oldest. A lot of us were in that same space, and the lecture at the time, because I think it was a strategy course, she wanted papers, and she summed it up. Why? Why are you saying this? Why? You have to put the why. You have to spell out the why. Yeah. And it's not something, I guess, that comes naturally depending on how you view things and your personality when it comes to communication. Well, this technically is a while ago, but I'm not ashamed to admit that I was in my mid-20s, and it's not I didn't understand why, but then it's like to the extent that it needed to be at tertiary level,
that's
right?
Fair, that's fair.
And you say it's a safe space, and I chuckled because I was slightly bad, but there was one student in particular who was like really bad because he would make comments, and you know how people are like in Ramchar talk, you just kind of say things that everybody assumes is self-evident, even though it might just be a consensus that has no basis in fact.
And they teach you about that, they teach you about what is common knowledge, and then you have to actually cite certain things.
And what is actual common knowledge, and what is just rumors that's believed to be, everybody knows that so-and-so is so-and-so, right? And she laid into him like in the middle class, why? And I was just like, that's rough. I'm glad I'm not him right now. But I hope that, I mean, to be fair, to some extent it was safe, because it's not as though everybody looked at it and was like, haha, you're the white guy.
You know what? At least
because we all kind of, to some degree, we're in the same boat as him.
Because from some perspective, I'd rather it from my lecturer than my boss who could fire me because of it.
Not just that, your lecturer, it's not as though she held it against him.
Exactly.
Right, moving forward. But your boss potentially might.
Because when you go to the next job, that job is going to call, why did you fire
Not just that, even in the moment, your boss is like, I need to judge you because you not doing your job could potentially hurt the business. Not just, I might not be the owner, that's point number one, right? But point number two, even for an owner, you think owners are heartless. Not all owners are heartless, folks. Some owners do have to consider, if my business falls, the rest of my employees will suffer because of what one employee did, if one employee is because of that closing, you know? So, and that's a hard thing. But another thing, university is a safe place. Group projects, for some people, it's too safe of a space, right? And that's the other thing with music. I think to some extent, academia tries to use group projects, which is a very, very, very arduous process that everyone suffers through most of the times. Even with the best groups, the projects themselves are sufferances, right?
But you know what?
But musical projects, I think, teaches collaboration in a venue, in a format, in a media form, not a media form, in an art form, That is a bit that is a lot more enjoyable, right? Like the one project I am proud of is we did a marketing plan to take doubles to India, right? But the process to that wasn't that enjoyable, although there was parts of the implementation that I did enjoy, kind of figuring out the nuts and bolts. But compared to coming together to do a song, right? It might feel, you know, your anxiety in the room might be heightened because you're exposing parts of yourself and you don't know how to communicate it. But at the same time, the enjoyment of coming together, you know? It's one thing to enjoy presenting a marketing plan. It's another thing to enjoy a musical performance. Even because when I looked at the rehearsal clips, one of the things that stood out to me just on the show was just how I reminded myself how much you would enjoy rehearsal.
Yes.
You don't need to actually have the audience to enjoy the music in rehearsal.
Correct is right. And coming back to that arduous process of group things, there are certain things in life that you experience that prepare you for, ironically, more discomfort, but you are stronger because of the past experience. There's a joke amongst conductors, especially on Instagram. If you want the big professional adult choir, you're going to have to deal with the school band at some point first, before you get to that. Because the school band of the elementary, the middle school, and the high school's children, they prepare you in ways that you, and the lessons that you take from there, when you do get to that professional level of the giant symphony orchestra and things like that, it prepares you for that. You know, the giant symphony orchestra, it looks glamorous, it looks like it'll be easy. You think, oh, I could look that up any day, anyhow. But you're dealing with humans, and there are some things that you have to learn before you enter spaces like that. And I think that is, I was telling a friend the other day, I'm so glad I grew up around old people, right? I'm so glad I grew up around extended family, because I would hear discussions and they would tell me their life stories and things that they learned, right? When you don't have that, when you don't have the village, which we spoke about, you know, some months ago, you know, you
definitely don't have that.
You come into life missing some tools, missing some equipment, and in order to gain those tools and equipment, it becomes a little bit more difficult for you. But I hope that those people who experience that, I hope they do have the humility to pass on those sort of lessons that they had to learn themselves, just as our elders had to.
Well, we're more or less out of time, but there's something that you just said there at the start of your last topic on, you know, you suffer through discomfort to learn how to deal with more discomfort. A controversial figure who I generally agree with, and I think is very misunderstood, Jordan Peterson, he has this saying, life is pain. Right? And to some extent, I believe that is true. Most of life is pain, but the pain is what makes the good, the joy, the beauty worth it. Ironically, two things that you wouldn't necessarily look to for great philosophy. One is the movie Troy, where Brad Pitt's Achilles basically says the gods are envious because we're mortal, because it makes everything more beautiful, because there's a finite amount that we could have of time. But also there's, ironically, again, something you wouldn't look at with regards to philosophy of video game, where the villain says life is strength. And he points to a woman, you know, who has to suffer through her mortal existence of arduous labor in a medieval setting. You know, there's no automation, there's no digital assistance, there's no wireless cash. You know, it's laboring on the fields from sunup to sundown.
And then laboring at home.
And laboring at home in the evening, right, to take care of your family. And that basic concept, you know, they say the same thing. Life is pain, life is strength, because you need strength to go through life.
It's worth it.
And the discomfort teaches you.
It teaches you that.
And gives you that strength.
It teaches you that.
Folks, ironically, we end with a little bit of optimism for once here on Talking Point at WSN. Maybe Mark helps bring the not so, despite the fact that literally speaking, we weren't necessarily speaking optimistic terms, but we were reaching to an optimistic place.
Life lessons.
Especially everything that happened this week. Of course, I did not get into it with Mark over some of the more alarming events. Despite all of that, at the end of the day, there's the trick about life. You don't have a choice. You either live it or you don't. And the second option isn't really much of an option. So we have to make the best that we have with the cards that we're dealt. This is Trinidad and Tobago. These are the cards that we've been dealt.
And if I may say one thing, because I have been and watching you discuss everything outside, I have been sort of updated with the recent happenings of what's been going on in this country. It's saddening, it's heartbreaking, but it instructs me to be a little bit more grateful for what I do have in my life, for the love that I am surrounded by, and the only thing that I can do with that love is to pay it forward. The only thing that I can do with all of those blessings is to pay it forward. Gratitude is a constant spiritual practice. It's not something that you have, it's something that you practice all of the time. And part of it is also just spreading the blessings as much as possible, because we are blessed to be a blessing to others, and your little hallelujah could be the biggest hallelujah for someone else.
Paying it forward, that's definitely one way that you could make someone else's day a good day. As my co-host always says, despite all of the usual pessimism, we still believe in TNT. Our allegiance is to the Republic. Sean Michael Small, Mark Anthony Peter, follow of us here on Talking Point. We will see you next week. Stay tuned. Mr. Johnson should be coming up at 10. Goodbye.
WESN.
My name is Karma Mirage. As a lifelong entrepreneur, I often share the benefit of my experience with our young innovators and small businesses. Just as I strive to guide others, our Constitution must also foster an environment for citizens to thrive. This begins with education catering to diverse learning styles and extends to establishing frameworks that support new enterprise. But are we doing enough? Constitutional reform needs your input by 15 April at constitutionalreform2024.gov.tt. It's your future, your constitution, your voice.
Coming soon to WESN.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why.
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live